Hey everyone, welcome to another Youth Innovation Showcase workshop. I'm Michael Unger. For the next hour, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, Dr. Karen Bondar. I'm going to introduce her in just a minute. But welcome everyone. How's everyone doing on a beautiful Wednesday afternoon? I'm here in my living room, located on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. Hopefully you know what territory that you are living on. You can look those up on many resources on the internet. I'm really excited for this next hour. We got a lot to get to. But first, we have a very special presentation from Hay from the RBC Foundation, which we're going to bring her into our webinar. And I'll let her take over a special presentation.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so excited to be here on behalf of RBC to present a donation of $15,000 to the Science Fair Foundation of BC. The grant is provided through our Future Launch program, which is a 10-year, $500 million commitment to empower Canadian youth for the jobs of tomorrow. And the program is designed to help youth gain new skills, grow their network, get work experience, and also enhance mental well-being. All the things that the Science Fair Foundation of BC is doing for you.
Thank you so much, Hay. We are so thankful to RBC Foundation for their support of the Youth Innovation Showcase and all of our other programs for that matter. This grant makes it possible for our educational programs and innovation competition to reach and serve more young people across BC and the Yukon. So on behalf of the Science Fair Foundation and all of the youth who benefit from the workshops like this one put on today, thank you so much. And we really look forward to working with you more in the future.
Wonderful. And if you did recognize that voice, that is the voice of the Executive Director of Science Fair Foundation BC, Madeline Gwinnett, which if you have been listening to our Let's Innovate podcast, you may have heard from, but also, and there's an amazing image, thank you to the RBC Foundation. Thank you, Hay, that money goes a long way. Super excited to have your involvement in the Science Fair Foundation and the Youth Innovation Showcase. Also, we've got other fundraisers going on right now. I'm going to tell you at the end of this workshop more about the fundraisers that we've got going on, including Sweating for Science. I'm going to tell you more about Sweating for Science at the end. But if you haven't signed up, sign up now. I've got some new running shoes. We're going to sweat for science. We're going to raise some money for kids that want to get involved in science fairs, which could be you right now. So if you are sitting there right now and you are thinking about entering the Youth Innovation Showcase, the deadlines are coming up. Are you feeling pressure? Are you on the fence? Where are you at? Well, if you're on the fence and you want to maybe get that next extra push, what we need is a science superstar. And that's exactly who we have for the next hour to tell us all about science communication. That is Dr. Karen Bondar. Now, if you don't know who Dr. Karen Bondar is, you certainly will at the end of this hour, because she literally is a science superstar. She is a biologist, an author, a philosopher. She's written a book called Wild Sex, Wild Moms, because she is not only a super amazing scientist, she's also a pretty big, strong advocate for moms out there. And when you go into her work, which I love her books and her talks, you know, she really advocates for, you know, moms in the nature. You know, if you, am I right, Dr. Bondar? Like this is like part of like your thesis about life is that moms rule the animal kingdom. And you know, embody that. And with all the things that you do, all of your television appearances, you live this life as a rock star scientist, science communicator, but also, you know, you ran for the school board and won recently. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Everyone, welcome Dr. Karen Bondar.
Thank
super
you,
excited
Michael.
for this next hour to be with you.
Oh, it is so great to be here. And what an amazing start off to the hour, having $15,000 in the coffer. That is such a fantastic donation from RBC. That is going to go a long way, I'm sure, to helping some of our budding scientists. And thank you, Michael, for such a great intro. It's always awesome to work with you. And hey, everybody who's watching our seminar, I am really glad that you're here because it is science fair season and it is time to really be starting to think not just about your project. I mean, hopefully it's been on your mind for a while, but and also think about how you're going to present that project. So I'm going to be talking to you in the next little while about all of these things. I first of all want to say that I am proud to live and work on the territory of the Stolo Nation. I live out here in Chilliwack, BC, and that's where I'm coming to you from today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. I have a small presentation for you all about science and science communication, because that's actually what I do. I consider myself to be a science communicator. Well, what does that mean? Well, great question. If you don't know what that means, no problem, because you are going to definitely know that by the end of my presentation. So I'm not only going to talk about our science fair projects, but being able to communicate about those is really important. And I actually am a judge for the Surrey District Science Fair. I've been a judge for that one for several years, as well as the Fraser Valley Regional Science Fair. So I have seen a lot of science fair projects, and I love the component of presentation. It's really important for students to be able to not just answer questions about their projects when the judges come and have a look at it, but it's also really important for students to take that initiative and to have the ability to talk about what they've done. So we're going to just get right into it, because I think it's really important to start off with a really strong idea, that's something that you love. And we're going to start off with this idea of telling a science story. Now, first of all, we are going to look at the steps in the scientific method, which if you've prepared your science fair project already, you may be familiar with some of these, but if you haven't, that's okay, because we've got time and we certainly have the resources to work with now. The first thing that any scientist has to do is think about something. You have to make an observation. And you know, in today's world where we're able to pick out our phones and Google pretty much anything we ever want to know ever, it's actually really important to stop doing that for a minute and actually consider your own powers of observation. That's where any good science project begins. We observe something, and then we get an idea about how it's working or why it's working or what's happening. And that is where we generate something called our hypothesis, or our educated guess about what is happening in a system. What we'll do next, once you've established your topic and your hypothesis, you'll move into creating your materials and methods before you go into designing or carrying out your data collection. It could look like an experiment, or it might look like a survey. It could look a whole bunch of different ways, and we'll talk about some examples as we go through this hour. But it's important for you to have that planned out far before you actually carry out the work, so that you have a plan that you can stick to. Now, when you've finished your experiment, or when you have finished collecting your data, you'll then move into your results section. And this is where you kind of make your data look a little better. You make your data look fancy, perhaps. You put it in a table, you might be putting it in a graph, or creating some kind of specific figure that shows off a little bit more about what you have collected, or basically the raw material that you will have created or collected during your experimental phase. And you don't actually interpret that until the very end, when you bring it all together and you interpret your results in the context of your original observation and hypothesis. Now, of course, you may know this to be the scientific method, but this is something that I tend to focus on a lot. Even with my university students, I have them create projects that depict the scientific method, because the scientific method is really, really important. It's a standardized way that all scientists in the world, whether they're here in Canada, whether they're across the world, whether they speak English or they don't, whether they're working in physics or math or biology, all scientists adhere to this magical thing, the scientific method. Now, why do we do that? I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on why we have this standardized methodology. Well, it's so that we can relate our results to each other, and so that we can almost verify each other's results. It doesn't really mean much if I simply say, I did an experiment and now I know this is what's happening in the world. Who's going to believe me, and why should they believe me? This is why it's really important to have this really standardized set of instructions for how scientists will do their work. And really, it's important for a scientist or another researcher to look at your materials and methods and be able to replicate your exact experiment. That's always a good rule of thumb too, that I say to students when I'm looking over their science fair projects. I'll really want to make sure to see that they have everything in their poster that I would need to recreate their experiment. And if you don't, then it should be something that you add in for sure before the presentation. So the scientific method is this excellent standardized process used by scientists. And that's how we talk. That's how we communicate, and that's how we present data to one another. But what happens when we want to share our science stories with the world? Now, I might not be able to, I might be interested in sharing some of my data with other scientists that are in my lab. And certainly that's what scientists generally do, is they share data with each other. But they don't necessarily take into account how much they can share their data or their scientific results with the general public. And that is where the field of science communication starts. We are the storytellers. I like to think about, I don't know, Michael, if you like to think about yourself as a storyteller, but I certainly love considering myself as a scribe of science.
Well, I don't know if you know my origin story, Karen, but I actually got into science because of stories. It actually was, science fiction that really was the impetus for me to get into space and astronomy. And science fiction, is a wonderful place to play with ideas. I mean, science is in the word. It's science fiction, and it's a wonderful place to think about the future. We are constantly thinking about the future, and the way to kind of like get into your heart, because that's really where it started with me. It's like, if I'm going to live a life of science, I want it to come from a place where like I'm really excited to wake up every day and do the things that I'm doing, and that comes from your heart. And it's kind of like, the power of storytelling, and that's where it started with me.
It's extremely powerful, because oftentimes what the general public is lacking with respect to their science knowledge is a relatable factor. Oftentimes people have kind of shut off their science doors, if you will. So it's important for us to create a relatable way to talk about the science that we are doing. And I love, Michael, how you mentioned science fiction, because the name pretty much says it all, isn't it? That you can take some of these scientific ideas and then really blow them out of the water in creative ways. And actually, a lot of scientists become science fiction writers, or vice versa, because the creativity that's required to tell a good science story is actually a really, really powerful mode of communicating about your science. And I love this image here, because this basically shows us this nice big book that we can open. And I think to myself, well, what is a story? What is a story, Karen? How do you know what a story is? Well, for me, the very most basic part of a story, the starts, there's some stuff in the middle, well, and then it ends. As simple as that. But what this gives your audience something to expect. They understand that you've started to tell them something and that you're going to get into the meat of it. And then they understand also that you're going to finish it. And having all of those components, not just in your poster or your paper, but actually using all of those components when you present your poster is really, really important. So stories, beginning, middle, end. Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. Now, what about your display board? Because I don't know about you, Michael, but whenever I look at these display boards for the science fair posters, to me, they kind of look like storybooks. And so I like to actually just play right on that format because this is basically an open book and it's your chance to show off everything that you've done for your science project in kind of like a book format. Now let's take a look at the specific parts of this display board. The one that I've chosen here to highlight as an example is one that I really like because what they've done is they've taken that project title and they put it smack dab in the middle, right across the top part of that board. So you know what the title of that presentation is. It's big, it's bold, it's right there, you can't miss it. And then what they do on this poster is they take it up to the top right, and then they go through from the top right to the bottom of that right-hand section. And then we proceed on to the middle section before finally going to that, I guess it's going to be my left, your right, to that my right side, which is where you will put your graphs and your conclusions. And so if I were to superimpose my story components onto this display board, it kind of looks like the start of my story happens on the far left side of the poster. The middle generally contains a lot of our wow factors. If you've got images, if you've got some specific places to put your pictures, your experimental subjects, some of your beautiful data or anything can go there in the middle. I like to have a lot of those visuals right smack dab right there in the center. And then what you can do is you can continue on with your story and you can go towards your conclusion. We're North American readers. We like to read things from the top right all the way down to the bottom left. And I know for myself as a judge, when I come to look at your poster, I really want to see this story unfolding right before my eyes. And so that is how I think I like to approach the science story. Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to think about a science fair project, and we're going to put the scientific method to work, and then we're going to figure out a story for our science project. But first of all, I want you to think about something that you're passionate about, because the very most important aspect of working in science is finding something that you really love. And it might not be obvious to you right away. It may take you a little while to sort out what things you want to study and what things you don't, but it always is a good idea to start with something you love. So Michael, I know we go back and forth about these things a lot. If I were to say to you, Michael, what is your passion? What would you reply to me?
Oh, Karen, you're now going to get into some very nerdy territory because honestly, when you ask me what is my passion, like I could say space, but if I actually really boil down to it, and when I think about looking at stars, like what is looking at stars? It's looking back in time, which gives you sort of like the key to what my passion is, because I love thinking about time travel. Okay.
Ooh.
Which is what you are doing when you're looking at stars. So time travel, I love the concept of time travel. I love thinking about time, and I love, if it's science fiction stories, but scientists think about it as well, because you think about, how different animals may have different perception of time than humans. So as humans, we have this method of telling time that lives inside of our brains. So yeah, I love just
that.
thinking about time.
And I love how your passion has really informed your career. I think in a similar way, mine has as well, because I love animals and I love all kinds of animals. I like the fluffy ones. I like the hard ones. I like the tiny ones and the big ones and the squishy ones. I like them all. But here's one that has a little bit of a reputation, I guess you could say, in that, skunks are an animal that, they're very cute, but they come with a very powerful anti-predator development. And that is that skunks are able to stink you. I don't know, has anybody in here ever been stunk by a skunk? It is It is not a fun situation at all. And in fact, it's actually a fairly common occurrence where people live in forested habitats because there's a lot of skunks there and people have dogs. And dogs and skunks and dogs kind of can result in a dog getting a whole lot of skunk stink on it. And this is a fun idea for a science project because, skunks are, they're cute. They aren't necessarily aggressive, but if they feel threatened, like perhaps if your dog's gotten off leash or something and is threatening the skunk somehow, the skunk is going to let it loose with this gross smelling, noxious spray that it ejects from these glands that it has right by its bottom. And the contents of these glands is just this putrid, yucky smelling, misty stuff that can actually be shot even up to 15 feet away from the skunk. So if your dog gets hit with this thing, it's not a good situation. The other thing that can happen here is that the molecules of the skunk smell are actually, they can embed themselves into your dog's fur, and they can actually stay there undetected because they don't start smelling until your dog gets wet. And then when your dog gets wet, it starts to stink all to high heaven, and you haven't quite got all the stink out. So I thought to myself, this is an interesting phenomenon. What could I possibly do to design an experiment, a science experiment, a science fair experiment about this very thing? So I went ahead and I did some more background research on this phenomenon. And Michael, do you know what I found?
Yeah, I think you're about to tell me. Also, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you know that you're changed your view on your presentation.
Oh, I was wondering about that. Let me go ahead and put that right back to there. How am I doing now? If I got the.
Well, we still see your notes there, but.
Oh no, there we go. Oh boy, there we go. Am I back to it?
You're back to it.
There we go. So I did some more background research on this, and I found all kinds of interesting things. I found out that there are people that bathe their dogs in tomatoes. There are people that bathe their dogs in vinegar. There are people that have come up with their own DIY methods using things like isopropyl alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, baking soda, dish soap. There are all kinds of ways that people have devised to try and get rid of this skunk odor. There's even some products that you can buy that are specifically created to eliminate this problem. But, being a naturalist, I thought, well, is there a way that we can solve this problem without having to necessarily go to one of those commercially available products? So let's think about this. Let's hit our scientific method. Now that we have, something that at least I know I'm passionate about, it's a problem. I mean, if your dog is constantly getting hit with skunk sprays, you are definitely going to want to solve this problem. But guys, any specific and fun issues that you are having can be turned into a science project. So let's go through our steps of the scientific method. I have made an observation that there is a skunk in the forest near my house that keeps on spraying my dog. And I hypothesize that there should be a natural way for me to get rid of this skunk stink in my dog. So how will I go about doing this? Well, I noticed during some of my background research that there were the tomatoes and the vinegar and the DIY and the commercially available skunk defoggers. And so those are going to be my 4 experimental trials. And so when I'm thinking about my materials and methods, then I'm going to want to collect those items, and I'm going to want to be pretty specific about the way that I collect them and the ones that I use. Because thinking back to what I was saying earlier in the presentation, it has to be clear enough that a scientist, not even in my lab, potentially not even in my country, could go ahead and do the same thing. So I would have to be explicit about all of those things that I'm using. How would I go about doing this? Michael, I was coming up with all kinds of interesting things in my head, and I don't know if any of them would actually work. I don't think I would want to wash my own dog a whole bunch of times. First of all, my dog wouldn't like that. And second of all, it really wouldn't be a very realistic scenario. And third of all, each of the dog washings might be somewhat different from the one before. That's not really a good way of doing a standardized experiment. So what I would have to do is potentially get some, I was thinking maybe I would get some little dog hair balls. This is something that's maybe available, but just in terms of thinking about my creativity, there would have to be some kind of material that I could expose to skunk spray and then try to clean it, but I'd have to use the same one for each of my trials. Then what I would like to do after I've collected all of that data is I would summarize it all into some graphs, perhaps look at how successful each of these different recipes was for getting rid of that skunk smell. And then I would like to talk about that. Were there ones that were more successful, ones that didn't work at all, ones that potentially were just an old urban legend or something like that? So this sets us up really well to do a standardized experiment about this problem. But let's take it a step further. Let's go ahead and put a storyline on top of this scientific methodology so that we can make it just that much more interesting for everyone who is going to come along and want to hear about all of our adventures in skunk smell. So we're going to go over two different ways that you can develop your storyline based on whatever it is that you are working on. Here we have, I love this image. Oh, it's not super clear. That's too bad. It's from Wikimedia, but it gives you a really nice example. I love how they've made it like a roller coaster, because a story is kind of like a roller coaster. You want to go on a certain ride and you want to know when that ride is done. You want to start it, you want to have a middle part of it, and then you want to end it. And that's exactly what we're looking at here in this figure with the dramatic arc. So I'm going on with my day. I realize my dog continuously gets sprayed with skunk. That's my inciting incident. That could be the beginning of the rest of my research career in science right there. But that's what changed it. Okay, that's what really happened to get this action. We're building our action. You see how it says on the way up there, rising action. Because once I've realized the inciting incident has happened, I've decided I'm going to try and collect some data to figure out how well I can clean my dog off with different skunk antidotes. And so I will go ahead and I will try vinegar. I will try tomatoes. I will try my DIY method, and I will try some of the commercially available products on there. And eventually I get to the very top, to the most exciting part of the actual experiment, which is tomatoes didn't work. Vinegar did not work. The DIY method, maybe that one did work. That was the mixture of detergent and baking soda, things like that. So that actually then gives you the falling action. We know what worked and what didn't, and we've come to a little bit of a resolution about how to make our dogs' lives happier, or perhaps our lives, if we are the ones that are having to continuously smell this skunk stink. Now, here's another way that you can do it, although I do really like this dramatic arc, because it's a nice, simple way of thinking about how you can build up your action within your experiment and then collect enough data to finally give you here's how we're going to move forward. That's that climax right at the top. We've got enough data. We've got the big message. Here's our payoff. And now we're going to put it all to bed. That's a really important part of your science fair project. When you're presenting it to the judges, when you're presenting it to your teacher or to your friends, this is a really good way to try and incorporate into your presentation style, because it'll really bring your viewer or your audience along for this ride with you. It's a way of making your project relatable to others. So we're going to try one more technique here to fill out your science story. And this is something that's called a story spine. So Michael, maybe you can come and help me. We'll develop our story this time using the story spine. This is a set of questions. We'll say, once upon a time. Michael, what happened once upon a time?
Once upon a time, I was walking my dog out into the forest and I encountered a skunk.
Every day. Oh, I guess we I guess we went a bit too far in that first step, didn't we? Once upon a time, there was a woman who had a dog.
Okay, so once upon a time, I took my dog for a walk.
Every day.
Every day,
a walk.
I encountered a skunk.
Until one day,
I figured, what if I devise a way to de-skunk my dog?
Well, I definitely think that that's important. And that is, that's something that's coming up. The way that I was thinking about this one, I'm sorry, Michael, to put you on the spot. Once upon a time, there was a scientist who had a dog. And every day, the scientist took her dog out for a walk until one day, the dog got sprayed by a skunk. And because of that, the scientist thought, this is a horrible thing to have happened to my dog. I think I've got to devise a way to help my dog so it doesn't smell anymore. And because of that, I found out that there's actually tomatoes could possibly be used. Vinegar could possibly be used. Oh, DIY methods could be used, or even commercially available products could be used. And because of that, I thought, well, I should probably check at how well each of those works. And because of that, I did check how well all those works. And I found out that the DIY method is the one that did the best job, until finally I realized that's the DIY method. It's the one that'll actually clear away those scent molecules that are stuck underneath the fur of my poor little dog. And ever since then, I have been using the DIY method because it worked for me. And the moral of that story is to always keep your dog protected from skunks. No, just kidding. But guys, this is a really cool approach to developing a story about any kind of science fair project. And so it's a really neat way to just use these 1 through 8. Once upon a time, this. Perhaps your project is an electrical project or one with physics in it. You're going to have to wrap your brain a little bit more around how you're going to frame that story. But it's a really neat way to take you to the next step, and then the next step, which follows from the one before. And this is how a narrative becomes part of your scientific method. So if we can go back up to our scientific method here, our observation and hypothesis is something that happens and then one day, right? And then we've designed our experiment and we go through all of these points, which we detail as our science in part of our sections here for the materials and methods, our experiment and data collection, and our results. Those are basically those, because of this and because of that and because of the next thing. Those are the steps that continue us on through our results until finally we get to that discussion when we're able to relate back our original questions and some of the data that we've collected. So it's important then to consider that each of these sections of your poster is itself its own little section, but all together they should form a story from start to finish. And that is really where these techniques come in. And it gives your science project another level of interest, especially to people who may not be in the exact field. It's just a really good way of describing and showcasing the work that you've done. Now, title. Let's spend a minute here talking about titles of your science project. I've come up with 3 different titles here that I thought might fit for this project. Number 1, efficiency of various treatments to remove skunk odor from your dog. Okay. Number 2, skunked. How to safely and effectively remove skunk odor from your dog. Number 3, you stink. Is there a natural way to remove skunk odor from your dog? Now, I like all of these. I would potentially think that all of these are acceptable, but I wonder if any of you have a favorite. Michael, do you have a favorite?
I mean, you stink sort of like stands out to me because it's like it's very definitive, and it kind of like it, you know, it's kind of I'm kind of like hit. I'm like, I stink, really? Okay, why? Why do I stink?
I
You
like
know?
that. That's awesome. And you know what? That's my favorite as well. And I think that in designing a title like that, I love to be drawn in. And exactly what Michael just explained, that he thought, you stink. Wait, what? What is that all about? That's something that we call a hook. And so it's important for your title to almost act like a hook, because you want to reach out and grab people who are walking by your poster and bring them right on in. And so a title can really do that, especially as we talked about earlier, having that title right in the middle at the top of your presentation. That is what's going to get people coming over to your poster and reading it. So it's really worth considering a bunch of titles. And actually, something that I've done in the past that's worked really well is I have come up with a number of different titles that I think would be acceptable for a certain presentation. And then I kind of work with different ones, and maybe I'll even check for feedback, get from feedback from my colleagues or from people who are watching or listening to my presentation. Because one of the very most important things about designing any presentation, whether you're a scientist or a TV star or an opera singer, is knowing who your audience is. So for a science fair project, we generally speak to members of the public, and we can't necessarily assume that they will have a really good understanding of science. And so bringing them in with a really catchy and fun title is a good way to get somebody interested in something that perhaps they didn't realize they were even interested in the first place. So because your title is so important, I would focus on that after you've done your project, so that you really have a good idea of how to include things in your title that really work with the data that you've collected and the overall well-roundedness of your presentation. Now, it's important, it is so important in the field of science to keep your message clean and clear. Often, I think one of the biggest setbacks that students experience when they are presenting their science fair projects is they get quite carried away with details and aspects of their data collection, and perhaps aspects of even their data that don't really matter for the final presentation. Now, when I say they don't matter, it's not necessarily that they don't matter for the science at all, because we know as scientists, it's really important to be detailed and to keep detailed notes of your data and all of the things that you've done, so that you can put that in your materials and methods. But when you're making that final presentation, and especially when you're making that presentation to non-scientists, you want to find a way to do your presentation, your storytelling really clearly. And a good way to do this, if you can try, and I invite all of you to try doing this with your science projects, is to explain your science story in 1 minute or less. Now, this is not an easy thing to do. 1 minute, 60 seconds, that is not a ton of time. And so, Michael, I'm sorry, my friend, but I'm going to put you on the spot again. Wonderful. I'm going to ask you to tell me the story of my science project as much as I've given you. Do you think, Michael, that you'd be able to do it in a minute?
Absolutely. But before we start, I just want to sort of like use this as like a teaching moment for me as well. So even if we go back to the slide, that's going to help me as well. I'm asking you, so that's going to help me tell the story. The one with the questions.
Yes.
There we go.
Oh, this one, the story's fine. Yes.
Yes, the story's fine. So originally, when you asked me this question, the error that I made, it was that the until one day was something you just said was like a trap that you fall into, which is that you jump ahead, I skipped ahead some steps, and I got right to kind of like the meat of the experiment, which when I think for anyone that gets involved in a process like this, you know, you are going to get really excited in that place where you are making some discoveries, and you kind of like, you want to kind of like pick apart all of these different discoveries and all of this, when you totally forget what I just did when I went through this story spine, was that to bring people into your story, you got to go back to the beginning of like how this story started. How did I even get to the point where I needed to figure out, you know, what the skunk was all about?
That's a great point. And I think I probably could have done a better job making that clear as well. When we get really wrapped up in our experiments and our fields of work, it's really easy to forget that people around you haven't been on that journey.
Yeah.
And that's why, you know, going through exercises like this are extremely useful, because we become the own experts in our own specific methodologies that we're using. And it's important for us to recognize that other students, other, you know, members of people who are coming to look at our work, they don't have that pre-context. And so, yeah, that's a really, really valuable point. And I think having that intro where you begin from a very basic place is a really good starting point for jumping off into the rest of your components of the science of your project. So yeah, great point. Thank you for bringing that up, Michael. So are you ready to be put on the spot?
I was stalling for time.
I've got my phone here.
Oh,
I'm going to set it for 1 minute.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay, I'm going to do my best here.
All right, go.
All right. Once upon a time, I was walking my dog in the Pacific bear forest.
Nice.
And every day I would walk my dog, and every day we would come back and my dog would be stinky. And I would think, why is my dog always stinky every time we come back from this forest? So one day I went back to that forest and I realized that we were walking through basically a skunk's home. And the skunk was creating the stink on my dog every day. So I wondered, is there a way for me to get that stink off of my dog? So I tried lots of methods. I did some research. I went on the internet and I saw so many things to tell me how to get the stink off the dog. And then finally I found the one that was going to be the one, and it was a DIY method with vinegar. It wasn't tomatoes, but it was this really weird thing that nobody had figured out. And ever since, that's how I got the stink off the dog.
Okay, you know what?
13 seconds over. I was
1 minute 14. Over. Perfect. And you know what, Michael? I love the way that you did that. And whenever this happens to me with a student presentation, I love it. I almost give them really good marks just because I love it so much that they do that. Because I do get those students that will tell me a story. They will immediately want to draw me in and tell me about why they chose a specific project. And let me tell you, as a judge, that is such a refreshing and wonderful thing to see. A student actually taking the lead and showing me and telling me what their story is. And for me, this is such a far more powerful way of accepting or looking at a presentation when a student can tell me the history or the background of it like that. So excellent job. And you know what, guys? This is something you should absolutely try with your parents or your friends or even your teacher. And it's important not just to think about it, but to actually say it out loud. So get in front of a mirror, get yourself in a quiet room, even with your Zoom screen on potentially, and just tell it. Tell your science, because that is how you will get better at talking about it in an informal way. And that is how you'll start to develop your storyline. It'll just pop out naturally as you talk about your journey through your experiment. And these are really important things to note, because often when we think about our science experiments and we think about the work that we're doing, we get caught up with presenting just the most perfect parts and the end result. but the journey in our science communication is really important as well. So don't forget to take us on that journey with you. That is something that a lot of scientists don't do. And maybe it's not their job to do that. It's maybe more the science communicator's job to do. But I look at science fairs and science fair presentations as kind of the OG means of science communication, because a science fair is a chance, it's an opportunity for you not to just show off that you've done an amazing project, which you have, and it's awesome, but it's also an opportunity for you to present it. It's not just letting the presentation rely on itself, it's you making that presentation even better. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to finish off our workshop today by talking about some more practical tips and ways that science presentations, things that I see quite often in different posters and different setups that I think could potentially be improved. Organization. First and foremost, I hope you've noticed throughout this presentation how I've been pretty clear about that start, that middle, and that end. And those parts of your science should always be there for all of your science writing, certainly for your publications and reports that you're eventually going to write, but also in terms of your presentation on your poster. Having that flow and having that organization is absolutely key. And another of the thing, several of the ways that we've been talking about how you present your data today will be very helpful for you as you go through and organize your presentation. Talk about it, present your story as you're putting your components onto the poster. And your story will either flow in a good way or it won't. And then that will be a chance for you to say, wait a second, it's not working from here. What is something that we need to change to really bring that next section together with the last one? And because we always start out in the same way, observation, hypothesis, design that experiment with your materials and methods, gather your data, show off your data, discuss your data with respect to your initial idea, and it all starts over again. So I cannot stress how important it is for you to have it really well organized. The best way to show an organized presentation is to understand it and know it and to have spoken about it many, many, many times. Get very used to talking about your work. Now, all parts of your presentation on your poster board, and if you have any materials that you're also presenting, potentially your lab notebook, or maybe even some of your materials that you used in your experiment, you've got to make sure that absolutely everything that you are presenting or that you are showcasing as part of your work really belongs there. And this is often a point where I see students have put a lot of extra things on their science fair posters. Perhaps they've included a lot more of the raw data, if they're taking a lot of measurements, things like that. It's important that you look at every aspect of your poster and make sure it's really necessary for it to be there. Potentially some of your extra data can be shared in an appendix, but it may not be a good use of space on your actual poster. Now it's, and I'm kind of reiterating that as well by saying in point 3 there, don't include, extra stuff. This is where we, if we're doing the experiment in a certain way at a certain time in a place with these specific things, fine. We don't need to include extra things that will just confuse your main message and muddle it up. Definitely use style, use your fonts, use your colors, and you can use different ways of emphasizing certain text. You can change your font style. You could change your font size to potentially really emphasize a specific word. Don't shy away from using a color scheme on your poster if you feel that it is not taking away from the main message that you want to generate. But I definitely appreciate seeing style elements on the posters that I am generally marking and consistent. But if you're going to use any aspects of style, whether it's that specific special font or whether you're going to go with a color, it's got to stay consistent. So every single one one of your sections from your hypothesis, materials, methods, experiment, results, discussion, they've all got to come with those same stylistic components. And that's another way to keep your entire presentation all tied in together in that really nice little package. Now, lastly, with visuals, as I've mentioned, you don't necessarily want to include all of your raw data. You'll definitely want to be looking at how you can make your data look better. So for example, when I was talking about having done my experiments, my pretend experiments with my little fluffy dog fur bits, I would have had potentially a setup where I have a dog bit that's been washed with the vinegar, the dogs that's been washed with the tomatoes, the one that's been washed with the DIY stuff, and the one that's been washed with the commercially available. I would like to see an image, perhaps an actual photograph of that experimental setup. And that's a really good piece of data to include on your poster, because that will show exactly how you set it up and how you went about carrying out what you've done. Now, when we're talking about graphs, some of you may be using graphs so far, and some of you may not quite be at that level yet, and that is okay. But a nice bar graph is often a good way to showcase how, for example, for this experiment with our different methods of getting rid of the stink in the dog, I think a nice bar graph would show off just how effectively each of those methods worked. There are so many ways that scientists can incorporate a good, strong narrative into what they're doing. And I think that as someone who spends my entire career looking at the science presentations that others do and create, I really cannot tell you how important it is for you to come up with a nice narrative to go along with your experiment. I would also invite any of you to check out the many excellent resources that the BC Science Fair Foundation has on their website. I spent a little bit of time going through some of the project ideas and some of the resources that are available there. And they are really, really helpful. There will be tons of good ideas that you can even, if you have something in your mind, one of your passions, perhaps there's even an idea that goes along with that. It's really, really important to start with something that you love and then celebrate the scientific, systematic process of science in a really beautiful way with a nice story. And with that, Michael, I will turn it back over to you. And thank you very much. I'm also very happy to take any questions if people have some.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. And yes, if you are here in the Zoom meeting, please use the Q&A function or the chat to get in for questions for Karen. I've got a few questions for you, Karen. So you went through sort of like a really great scenario for science fairs, which of course, yes, it is science fair season. Of course, we have an initiative called the Youth Innovation Showcase, which is a little bit different. And that sort of like really boils down to sort of kind of like what I did, that minute pitch. So do you have like any, if for people here that are thinking about entering the Youth Innovation Showcase, any tips for creating really concise messaging around a concept, perhaps an innovation, as opposed to sort of like an experiment, but something that they are, and perhaps it's an invention, perhaps an idea. What tips might you have for that kind of format?
Great question. I think that for your various formats, the single most important thing you can do is talk about it with your colleagues. And that will really help you to boil down the exact message that you want to get across. Literally having these conversations. I know you and I go back and forth talking about various aspects of our work, but to be able to, especially with a conceptual idea where an experiment may not be the thing that you're using, perhaps it's more of a research project or more of a philosophical idea. I think the best way to clarify the story that you want to tell is to talk about it and to engage with the material and to really get dirty, I guess I would say, get dirty with your material and familiarize yourself with it. If I'm ever working with a concept or a topic that I'm not quite as familiar with, that's my cue to really become familiar and immersed in that material. And eventually, for me, the narrative will pop out, but not until I have had a chance to really understand and engage with what I've been working on.
Interesting. So, another, thing that you just said there is that, you talk with your colleagues. Now, I can imagine, putting myself back in my shoes, thinking about time travel, and, I didn't really have colleagues, and I perhaps, was a bit shy to even talk about my ideas. So how do you practice that? Like, you just practice into a mirror, like, what if you don't really have colleagues to bounce ideas off of?
Well, that's a really good point. And also, you know what? It might be like you said, you might just be a little bit shy at first. And absolutely, do I ever get used to talking into my mirror? You bet I do. Because for me to be able to communicate something or to discuss a topic, I actually, my process is very loud. And so I will talk to the mirror. I will. But another thing that I can do, I mentioned colleagues, and I think that that's a pretty loose topic, because what I mean as a science communicator is I mean anybody who would potentially be walking past your poster or potentially viewing your work. So I like to consider colleagues as not necessarily even scientists, just people that I know. Because if I can communicate my idea to my best friend Joe sitting here, and Joe doesn't know a thing about what I'm doing, that's the money for me. Being able to let a non-scientist understand, or to help them understand my concept, that's the money. And I think that's actually a really good exercise to go through. I'm glad you brought that up, because it should be something that maybe your grandmother, or maybe your I don't know, your brother's friend, they don't have any interest in it, but if you can get them to understand your entire concept, well, then you are on the right track.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of finding someone you're comfortable talking with. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really great point. I think it's handy to have, friends that aren't in your field. And I rely on them a lot, because sometimes I just generally say some things, especially when it comes to space. Space has some big ideas. Some people don't think about space 24/7 like I do. So, with your idea, sometimes if you do have peers, colleagues that are doing the same things as you are, finding people that you can trust, that maybe will give you like an honest opinion, family members that aren't in the science field, all great resources. We do have a couple.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we do have a couple questions that I want to get to before we
awesome.
run out of time.
Absolutely.
Carol Brown asked, "Do color themes enhance a project?"
Yeah, Carol, absolutely. I actually became an interior designer during my PhD. I just went to night school and did that. And I learned a lot about color theory and how color can actually really impact your message. So when I have a lot of time to work with students, and certainly with my students that take my methods in science communication class at UFE, we absolutely go into color theory. For your youth innovation showcase project and for your science fair project, I would often suggest going with a complementary color scheme, because it is something that's bright and striking. I used to joke during my school days in university that most projects and talks and posters, when I would go to conferences, scientific conferences, they all use the same colors, the same fonts, in the same way. And so right from the get-go, I've been one to absolutely flex my creativity muscles and my color muscles. So absolutely, Carol, I think it matters a lot.
Great. Carin, we've almost got a full hour. Thank you so much for joining us. That just flew by.
It really did. I could talk about this forever. I appreciate the opportunity, guys. Thank you.
For all of you out there, hopefully you're already fans of Let's Innovate, our podcast. I interviewed Karen, got into your story, a little bit of your backstory, which we didn't get into here. Really cool story about you going to Germany to be ballet. Really cool story. Check out Let's Innovate. Also, check out Sweatin' for Science. This is our big fundraiser. Go to sweatin.science to learn all about this fundraiser where we're going to get out, we're going to exercise, we're going to raise some money. You can also go to the Instagram page, which is at Sweatin' for Science, for more info to win a hoodie. Oh man, where do I get a hoodie? I'm going to have to get into that contest. And also, the Youth Innovation Showcase is fast approaching. Deadline to register and submit your pitch video. All the tips that we talked about, I think, are all great, tips for you to make your pitch video. If you want to ask more questions, you can message us. You can message me. I would love to help you with your pitch video. You can find me at Michael John Unger, Michael J. Unger on Twitter, Michael John Unger on Instagram. But that submission dateline is April 15th. So go to youthinnovation.ca to submit your project. And I would love to see all of you in the Youth Innovation Showcase. Karen, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here in this webinar. We will see you again next time.
Thanks, everyone.